Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to the AfPA webinar. My name is Anna D'Angelo. I'm the AfPA Director of Technology and Leadership, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. Before we start with this webinar, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we meet today. I would also like to pay my respect to the elders, both past and present, and also extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. So thank you again for joining us today, and thanks to today's presenters. You see in this slide, we have Rob Busuttil from Victoria DTP, Sean Mumford from Downer, and Trevor Distel from Colas. Now, before I start this presentation, I just want to give you some housekeeping. So this webinar is going to last 1 hour. And again, I remind you to please turn your microphone off so that we don't get any noise. And you can use the chat function if you want to ask a question. We will have around 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. And lastly, the webinar slides and the recordings will be available on the AfPA website. So let me start by giving you an overview and the purpose of this webinar. These two webinars have been prepared by the AfPA Surfacing Committee, and I would like to thank them all for their support and their input. The purpose of these tech talks and these webinars is to actually talk about the current spray sealing practices and the alternative techniques to using cutters in spray seal. This is the first webinar. It's an introductory session, which will focus on why we use cutters in the construction of spray seals, explore the safety and environmental hazards associated with their use, and the evolving practices in their application. So you see on the screen, there will be added two webinars, one in September and the other one in October, where we will share some projects underway and the current transition to the use of bitumen emulsions as an alternative to hot cutback bitumen in New Zealand. So a few years ago, AfPA developed a strategy and roadmap to incrementally develop and implement alternative techniques or products to migrate and to bring Australia in line with sustainable best practices adopted in other developed countries. Now, I won't go into the details of this strategy now, but I just want to mention that there is a project that is being currently conducted by NACO. NACO is the National Asset Centre of Excellence, which is an initiative of the Queensland Department of Transport and Main Roads and the Australia Road Research Board. And there's also a national project conducted by Austroads to identify all practices and conditions requiring the use of cutters and define the boundaries where these cutters can be reduced or where they are not needed. Now, if you are interested in knowing more about the strategy and the roadmap, again, these documents are available on the AfPA website, so I invite you to have a look on the website. Right, the program for today, as I mentioned, we have three presenters. So Rob Busuttil will talk about why we use cutters to construct spray seals. Sean Mumford from Downer, apologies that is spelled incorrectly, safety and environmental issues with using cutters, and then Trevor will talk about changes in the current use of cutters. So I'm sure you all know Rob, Sean, and Trevor, so I don't need to tell much about them. I'm going to just hand over to Rob to start, and I will run the slides. So Rob, and over to you.
Okay, so afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so as Anna said, my name is Robert Buzatil. I'm the specialist engineer pavement surfacings with the Department of Transport and Planning in Victoria. So yeah, I'm just going to go through about why we use cutters in spray seals. We use cutters and spray seals in different applications. So to answer that question, where do we use cutters? Well, we use cutters where we're priming a new pavement prior to putting another surfacing on. We might use it in initial seal. Some of you might call them primer seals, but we use them in initial seals, and we can use them in reseals. But the question is, particularly for this webinar, is, well, why do we use cutters? And the main reason why we use cutters is we add it to bitumen to reduce its viscosity, basically, and we do that for a number of reasons. So when we're doing a prime, we need basically the mix of bitumen and cutter to have a very low viscosity, because we want it to penetrate into the base, into a granular pavement. And there are grades of prime that are specified in the Australian Standard 2157, and they're the AMC 00 and AMC 0, generally the two grades of prime that we use, and they've been used for a long time and used quite successfully. Now, there are other options there. There's emulsion primes as well, but I think at the moment, generally, a lot of priming is done with cutback bitumen. So that's one reason why we add cutter is for get a very low viscosity for priming. The other reason is we add cutter when we're doing sealing as well, because again, we want to reduce the viscosity. Obviously, not as much as for a prime. Just we need to reduce the viscosity just a small amount to improve the adhesion of the aggregate to the binder, and as it says, they improve the wetting of the binder up the aggregate, and that means when the temperature is a little bit lower, if we don't add cutter, the binder can get very hard and brittle. And if you do that and you're doing a seal later in the season and you've got no cutter in it, depending on the type of binder, when you've got no cutter in it, the binder can get very hard, and you put traffic on it, it can basically the bitumen can fail. And that's when we get stripping of the aggregate from the seals. So by adding the cutter in it, it allows the traffic to roll the aggregate over and form that good aggregate mosaic that we like. So you assist with that aggregate reorientation and movement in cooler weather. Now, if we're doing sealing in middle of summer, we may not need any cutter at all, and that's what we're aiming for. Next slide, please, Anna. The other reason we add cutter in is to get a good distribution of binder coming out the back of the sprayer. So you see the photo there. We can see these, we call them tram lines here, but you get those lines in the binder, which means the binder is not fanning out properly, and that's not what we want. We want a nice even distribution of binder. So we sometimes may add cutter in to assist with that. And yes, I know there are other reasons why we might not get that. It's not just cutter; it can be the setup of the sprayer as well. But that can be one reason why we get that issue, that the viscosity of the binder isn't right coming out the back of the sprayer, and we can have that sort of problem. So and that depends on the binder as well. So with C170 versus crumb rubber versus a PMB, the amount of cutter required to assist with that will vary. So you can see there's obviously a list of binders there with different viscosities for different temperatures. So next slide, please, Anna. As I said, ideally we should be trying to aim to do sealing in summer, because that means we can use very little or no cutter. But obviously, practicalities are that sometimes we have to do sealing later in the season. when temperatures are getting cooler. So we add a little bit of cutter to basically assist with that aggregate adhesion, as I was saying before. So we reduce the risk of stripping. Now, we don't eliminate the risk of stripping, so it's just something to be mindful of that, and we'll get to that. But so when we have cooler temperatures, we're going to add a little bit of cutter to assist with that binder wetting the aggregate. Also, in shaded areas, obviously, when we're talking about cutter use and cutter addition, it's all built around temperature, pavement temperature and the ambient temperature. So we've got to consider that. But you need to proceed with caution with that. That's why, because we can get too late in the season and we start adding a lot of cutter in, which cannot be, it may not be a good thing. In a lot of cases, it isn't, because we end up with having problems. You might get a seal through winter, and the trouble is when it does get hot, and obviously it will. We do still have a lot of that cutter in the seal, and when we have a lot of cutter in the seal, the binder gets very soft, and the aggregate can move around and roll over, and we can end up with flushing in the seal, and can even end up with the seal picking up. So this is why we try and avoid doing sealing in winter, because too much cutter is not advisable, because we generally end up with a problem later on. And you see that diagram there. People think that cutter was always thought to be a temporary reduction in viscosity, and it does come out, but it does take longer than we think. So, if you do a seal in the middle of winter, it's not all going to come out by the time summer rolls around. And there's been plenty of seals we've seen where, the first bit of hot weather on it, it flushes up and picks up and travels down the road. Next slide, please, Anna. So when we use cutters for all those reasons. But I'd say, look, there has been a general reduction in cutter over time, and when we look at cutter, it's all about it requires a lot of judgment, it requires experience to decide how much cutter to put in, because it's not just looking at the pavement temperature and reading off a chart and that's how much cutter you put in. You've got to think about the traffic. You've got to think about the time, the weather, not just that day, but for weeks and months afterwards. And cutter really isn't there to be a means of preventing stripping or tramlining. It's all about good practice. You can't just add cutter in and think that's going to solve all your problems, because generally you'll end up making other problems. So cutters by themselves aren't a replacement for good practice. You really got to make sure that everything else is going for you. You've got good, dry, clean aggregate. You're doing it at the right time of year. So avoid doing things in the middle of winter. Try and do your seals in summer, and making sure that the sprayers are calibrated and well maintained. So with cutters, it's all about having everything else being done according to the specification or following good practice, and that way you can minimise the amount of cutter that's going into your seal. So that's it for me. So I will hand over now to Sean in sunny Adelaide, and over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate that. I'm just looking out the window. I'm not sure how sunny it is today, but we've been getting a little bit of spray sealing done recently, but not a lot. Oh, excuse me. So for those that don't know who I am, I'm Sean Mumford. I'm the thin surfacing manager for Downer, based in Adelaide, South Australia. And I'm going to talk briefly on safety and environmental issues with using cutters. Next slide, please, Anna. Yep. So most of the typical cutters used in our industry are petroleum-derived kerosene, which has the following properties. Flash point of a minimum of 38, that's for standard kerosene, and a minimum of 61.5 for high flash kerosene. And I guess what I've noticed over my career in this industry is that there's been a lot more adoption in more recent times for the high flash cutters, particularly for the field addition of the product out in the field. Initial boiling point of those products is 140 degrees, and the final boiling point is about 300. Auto ignition temperature of kerosene is greater than or equal to around 220 degrees. And most of that info is available in the Australian standard 3568, oils for reducing viscosity of residual bitumen. Next slide, thanks, Anna. So in using cutters, there's obviously some safety concerns and issues that will crop up from time to time. The bitumen, the cutters added to the bitumen themselves normally take place on site or at a depot or at a binder terminal, and are obviously circulated in those bitumens or binders before spraying takes place to reduce the viscosity. Adding cutters to hot bitumen will generate volatile vapours. So during transport and spraying, irrespective of where and how the cutter is blended, you will get some of that volatile vapour that can, I guess, cause the main concerns with fire or explosions around the use of cutters, I guess. Operators that are using cutback binders or cutting back the binders in the field, transporting or spraying those products, they need to ensure that safety guidance procedures are in place to reduce the risk and potential for those explosions and fires during the handling of the cutback binder process. It's all about, I guess, reducing the risk to the workers that are going to be using those products. There is quite a bit of information actually out there available in bituminous material safety guides and work tips on giving you some advice on how to handle cutters and cutback binders. Next, thanks, Anna. So mitigating the risk measures when using those cutters. If you're using high flash point cutters, they're less volatile and therefore they are safer to use, and it overcomes some of the HAZChem requirements with handling those products, particularly on site. Training. I probably can't emphasize enough how important the training side of working with cutters and cutbacks can be. There's training courses available through AfPA with bitumen safe training and working safely with bitumen training. And any operators that are working with cutters or cutbacks really should have a good understanding of that type of training. And they also should make sure that they've got appropriate safe work method statements and work instructions in place, and follow the product changeover procedures and product transfer inspection checklists. In all of my experiences, I've found that if you're following the guidance that's available in changeover processes, have good inspection checklists for transfers of products, and having good boil out procedures, and all of those things will significantly reduce the risk of working with these products. And in the slide, you can see I've got another little picture in there, water finding paste. Any operators that are working out in the field in particularly, having a good understanding of whether there's any contamination with any products they're using is paramount, and any good contractor that's transporting or working with bitumen in the field should have that water finding paste with them. So next, thanks, Anna. Some other environmental considerations with working with cutback bitumens, and particularly with primes or initial seals. The planning of the works forecasting around weather conditions, probably a bit similar to what Robert was saying just a little bit earlier, really having a good understanding of the site conditions, the product that you're selecting, the viscosity, curing or breaking time of those products, potential for rain, humidity, temperatures, shaded areas, location and proximity to water courses, condition of the gradient and pavement. I've got a little snippet there of a risk assessment that comes out of some information developed by the EPA in conjunction with AfPA. And there's also an advisory note 8 that provides some of that same information. But I guess really having a good understanding and risk assessment of the activity and the site that you're going to be using these products on is highly recommended. And sometimes that might mean that that type of work needs to be assessed in advance of a surfacing or sealing crew actually arriving on site as well, to make sure that all the controls of those risk assessments are in place. Next, thanks, Anna. And I thought it was also worth mentioning, while we're talking around safety and environmental issues with using cutters, that as an industry, spray seals actually have a lower life cycle inventory and total kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per square metre generated to apply when compared to other road construction surfacing treatments. So, we are an industry or a treatment that's available, that's already got a slightly lower footprint than some other treatments that are available out there. Not to discount that if you are using cutter in spray sealing, it does contribute to generating volatile organic compound emissions, so fumes and smog, and it does contribute to impacts on air quality. But if we're planning for the future and adopting sustainable best practices, that will provide for a reduction in emissions from using cutter. So I think just to cap that off, and going back to a couple of the things that Robert said earlier, reducing the amount of cutter through, adopting best practices and really having a good understanding of the type of work you're doing, the time of the year that it's being done, and what the outcomes might be in a few months down the track. It's really important for the use of bitumen that you're going to be cutting back with cutter. That's probably the end for me for that part of it. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Trevor Diston.
Thanks, Sean. Good afternoon, everybody from overcast Sydney. This will be the last section of our formal presentation. I'll be looking and reflecting on the changes that we've seen in cutter practice over recent years in my presentation, which will basically expand on what was previously been discussed. So what we've seen happening over, I'd say, the last 15 years at least, is that there's been a reduction in the use of cutters, the amount of percentage of cutter that we add to our binders in our spray sealing application. And this has really been come to fall because of performance issues that we've had with some of our seals, which have resulted in flushing and bleeding. And this has been accelerated by the increase in heavy trucks on the use of a spray seal in the early life. It's also was caused by some changes in our weather patterns, where we've seen some very warm spells of hot weather in what have been traditionally cooler winter periods, which has livened up the cutter or the binder in the new seal. And then, as Sean said, to operate in a more safe environment, a lot of companies have resorted to using high boiling point cutters. The challenge with these is they can stay and hang around in the binder a bit longer than the low flash cutters. So it takes a bit longer for them to escape out of these new seals. So these sort of made people rethink about how we use cutters in the construction of spray seals. So both from a contractor applying the seals to the road agency, we've had to rethink how we're going to continue constructing seals without using cutters. So there are a number of factors that influence the decision around the percentage of cutter you're going to add into your binder in the construction of a seal. They primarily will be determined by the road surface temperature at the time of spraying. And we must bear in mind that your road pavement temperature will vary during the day. So typically when you start in the morning, it'll be much lower. So you'll tend to use a higher percentage than you would use during the middle of the day. So it's always important to take note and monitor that change in pavement temperature so you can reduce your cutter and not just stick with the same percentage. Also, what's been mentioned is the weather forecast for the next immediate future after the seal is open. Any sudden change in overnight temperature to single-digit values can result in brittle failure before the aggregate's had a chance to reorientate itself onto its least dimension, which could result in this the aggregate being stripped off the seal when it's exposed to heavy traffic during that cold period. And then the last one is where we often see it on new seals is we get stripping under bridge decks or in shaded areas. So it's again, cutters are helpful in preventing this from occurring. The traffic levels will also have an influence. The traffic's very important to the reorientation of the aggregate in its early life. So you form that mosaic, which helps lock in the aggregate. If you're not going to have high traffic to achieve that, then cutter will certainly help you achieve that a lot quicker. But in the same time, we need to be always mindful of any seasonal activities taking place immediately after the construction of a new seal, like grain harvesting, where you've got these heavy loaded vehicles turning and doing turning movements on a fresh seal, which can cause a lot of damage to that seal that we saw in the previous photo. Other consideration is the viscosity of the binder. We need to apply different rates to modified and unmodified binders. The moisture content of the aggregates just before use will also have an influence on the decision how much cutter to use, and we'll see that in the next slide. And then the type of seal. Using a double seal, you don't need as much cutter in the post application of the binder and aggregate as you do in the final, because you don't want to trap cutter in the lower layer, and also you've got the benefit of the second spray and interlock of the aggregate to hold that initial spray and aggregate in place. And similarly for any aggregate that's or seal that's going under asphalt, you also want to limit the amount of cutter that's going to be in that new seal. So I've just taken handpicked this particular chart, which is published by Transport New South Wales in 2017 as a technical directive to give guidance to practitioners. And it's not a spec, it's purely for guidance to help them select the appropriate level of cutter based on the road pavement surface temperature. You can see the two lines called A and B there, which have been overlaid with another two parallel lines. Well, the A line is the red line is if there's if the spray seal aggregates to be used or happen to be wet, then you apply that line, and the B line is if they're dry. And you can see there's typically about a 2% difference in the amount of cutter you use for a given temperature. The other two lines were the lines that were in place before this, previous to the issuing of this updated directive, which recognize that I need to change the amount of cutter we use in delivering our spray seals based on our more recent experiences. So what we've done as an industry, and this is what our National Spray Sealing Committee have been considering, is practices around different states by different companies and contractors. And what we recommend is good practice in terms of decisions around what is the minimum cutter level that you need to use in your binder for your spray seal based on low and high traffic volumes and the type of binder you're using. And we've come up with this draft table here, which is a substantial reduction or change in what's in the current specifications of the various road authorities. And even the Austroads 4K table, which is currently under review, which shows a much higher level of cutter. So this has now been put forward to Austroads and their members to give consideration to, and we are hoping that this will become more accepted by all road authorities, and we'd be able to put this in place. And we have revised Worktip 14 on the use of cutters, which will incorporate this table in it, and it really is a guideline so people can consider how they can reduce the amount of cutter when carrying out their works. And there will be exceptions that you won't be able to apply this in all cases, and I've touched on some of those exceptions. So it is some food for thought, and it's really showing that we can, in most cases, construct our seals without using high percentages of cutter if we apply good practices. So what are these good practices? Well, the key thing is road temperature and having good warm weather. And this is certainly Australia is blessed as a country where we have a lot of hot weather and minimal rain compared to most other parts of the world. Yet we unfortunately are one of the few countries in the world that still use cutters. So we need to make better use of our good weather to construct our seals with our cutters. There are challenges, and one is certainly we like to use crumb rubber as our prime binder for spraying to construct our spray seals. And we all know that crumb rubber, adding rubber to the binder increases the viscosity dramatically compared to the base C170 viscosity, and this can be a challenge. And there is a tendency for people to believe that you can't spray it unless you put cut in. Well, this is not necessarily the case, and there are good practices around spraying what we used to call S45R binder without cutter. One is to look at using larger nozzles. So we're talking about the AN 26 or 38 size nozzle. But this can only be used if you've got a high bind application rate and the geometrics of the road allow you to travel at a faster speed to deliver your spray rate without increasing the risk of safety of the road users or the driver of the sprayer. And paramount is heating the binder. This binder, because of its high viscosity, needs to be heated to a temperature of 200 degrees to ensure that you get a more uniform distribution out of your nozzles. And then lastly, we're very spoiled in that we're able to often spray conventional C170 using up to 8 meters length spray bars. This is not going to be possible with a high viscosity binder, so we're going to have to reduce the width of the spray bar so that you can get a more uniform pressure in that spray bar so that you don't get tram lining when you spray S15R modified binder. And it's not always just in the spraying of the binder. It's also critical that you minimize the the time delay from the time the binder hits the cold substrate and the application of the cover aggregate, because that binder viscosity reduces dramatically as it hits that cold binder, and its propensity to wet the stone is also greatly reduced. So that becomes quite critical in the operation. It's also important, as has been said before, we need to pre-coat the aggregates, which help break down the surface tension with the binder, and incorporate adhesion agents to improve the adhesion between the binder and the aggregate. These will all help improve and reduce the risk of any stripping with wet or cold weather. And then also make sure that we've got enough rollers on site, that we're able to at least perform 6 passes on the new seal, so that we're able to reorientate the aggregate and embed it into the underlying bitumen. What's also said before, using cutters is seen by a lot of parties as a panacea to covering up poor practices, and especially spray equipment that's not in good condition, or even aggregates that we receive from the quarries that are not clean and dry and are sometimes dirty. So we need to look carefully at how we deliver these spray seals, so that we avoid having to compensate by using cutter in the construction process. And also, it's not wise to use cutter in a seal. As we said, we know it reduces the viscosity, and if you've got a fresh seal that's got cutter in it, and it's in a high stress area, and if there's any heavy traffic or braking there taking place, certainly as we see at intersections, roundabouts, or steep ground, that's going to destroy the seal, and you're going to have problems in the early life of that seal. So we don't want to use cutters in those environments. And again, the waterproofing seal or SAMI seal that's placed under new asphalt, you want to eliminate any cutter there, so you don't trap the cutter in the seal, which will then possibly lead to softening of the asphalt overlay, which can potentially lead to rutting of the new asphalt under heavy traffic and hot weather. And also important is timing. If you're constructing a new seal at the end of winter, if you're going to put cutter in there, the risk is that you'll still have trapped cutter in that binder, and with the first hot weather you're going to have potential bleeding, because it can take up to 3 months as a rule of thumb for that cutter for 80% of that cutter to escape out of that binder. And then just another point is avoid doing any priming with cutters or AMC 0 or 00 on a foam or emulsion stabilized granular base course. So just in conclusion, I've given you some sort of background to the reasons why we need to reduce the amount of cutters that we are using in the construction. But there have also been some developments in Australia in different states where contractors have resorted to alternative techniques where they don't use cutters anymore, and these have been very successfully carried out. And I'll just mention a few here on this slide, and there are many more. So one of the areas where this has been used in Victoria with the introduction of synchronized sprayer and chip spreaders, where you use the top right-hand side of my slide there, you'll see the binder is sprayed and the aggregate is immediately spread directly over that fresh binder, so that the binder is still very liquid and hot, so it's easily able to coat the aggregate, which helps improve the bond and reduces the risk of stripping. Another development has been an S45R low viscosity crumb rubber binder, which you're able to spray at your normal spray temperature, but the binder viscosity is much reduced at that spraying temperature. So it fans more uniformly, and it wets the aggregate a lot easier. Again, this has been used very extensively in Victoria with these synchronized spreaders and chippers. We've also seen the use of high float gel emulsion for constructing initial seals. This is a emulsion where the residue after the emulsion is got a gel structure and it doesn't run off. And it increases the cohesion of the residual binder so that you don't get aggregate loss when the new seal is, or limits the aggregate loss when the new seal is exposed to traffic. And then also the replacement of kerosene in primes by using a bio-based replacement is also another way of constructing a prime seal without using kerosene. Now, these 4 techniques will be discussed in more detail at the next webinar, which will take place in September. And I'd certainly recommend that you listen to it. It's a very interesting practices there, which there's no reason why they can't become widespread across all states in Australia. And then, as Anna mentioned, part of it will be the experiences in New Zealand, where they've mandated the use of emulsions to replace cutback bitumen in all their spray sealing operations from this year. So that's also another development which will be interesting to hear more about. So from my side, I'd like to thank you all for participating, and hopefully we'll open it up to questions, Anna.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Perfect timing. So 1:15, and we can go through the Q&A. And yes, just a reminder, as Trevor mentioned, so the next one will be, next webinar will be on 4th of September, will be on existing practices to reduce or eliminate cutters. And then the last one will be in the 1st of October, and it will be about where we are going. So what is next? Right, so questions. Let's have a look at the chat. There are a few questions I'm going to go through. Okay. Are cutters used as release agents or cleaning solvents on the road making machinery?
And I could probably answer, when we use cutters, we actually refer to kerosene. So I know some contractors use diesel as a cleaning agent for their asphalt operations, which is not ideal. But cutters are also used to flush out typically a spray bar at the end of spraying or cleaning out the nozzles. But this is also something that it's not. There are other alternative ways of doing that. I don't know if Sean wants to comment.
Anyone?
Yeah, look, thanks, Trevor. Yeah, look, in my experiences, there are some solvents that are used in controlled environments for cleaning some of the equipment that we use in spray sealing and other surfacing treatments, to be fair. In most situations, they'll be used in controlled environments, in depots or wash bays that have got, I guess, a way of capturing those products so that they don't end up in waterways or being, I guess, collected and ending up in stormwater or anything like that. So.
I see that Sai has the end up. So Sai, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to let everybody know that we, as in the Transport for New South Wales, we have stopped using diesel as a release agent in asphalt since 2000.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, I've got another longer question, which is about the cutters emissions of effect on the workers' health. And so comment on this. Cutters based on petrol, kerosene, etc., are not recommended in Europe and some places in America. In these countries, emulsions are recommended because based on the use of water, which evaporates and doesn't produce a negative effect on the health of workers. Would you like to comment on this?
I'm not sure whether I'm qualified to comment on the effects on workers' health, but I guess just from my personal perspective, when you see a sprayer spraying bitumen on the road, some of those, I guess, fumes that you'll see, not all of them are generated by the use of cutter. A lot of that will be generated by the heat of the product that's being sprayed and the reaction with the base or the roadway that it's being sprayed on. Yeah, just how much of I guess that volatile in the fumes would be having any effect on workers' health, I probably can't comment on. But I don't know a great deal about practices in blending or manufacturing of emulsions in other countries. But there would be use of cutters and other chemicals in the production of emulsions in this country with the emulsions that are available to us now. So in those sort of confined environments where they're actually producing those types of products versus, I guess, spraying out in the field. In most situations, when we're spraying binders out in the field, particularly hot binders, there won't be people on foot close enough to those activities to be directly being impacted by those fumes. That would be one of my comments, I suppose. A bit long-winded.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're right, Sean, about 30, 40 years ago, they used to have people on the back of the sprayers. Those days are long gone. We don't have people near the sprayer when it's spraying and it's in an open environment. It's not like you got someone on an asphalt paver sitting there is exposed to potential fumes all the time in a spray sealing crew. It's so open that any sort of fumes, if there are any, sort of get blown away pretty quickly.
Yeah, and the closest person to that activity is really the operator of the sprayer, who's in a fully enclosed air-conditioned cab. So they're probably fairly, I guess, protected or not as exposed as some other surfacing treatments or even some other production facilities where they might be producing products in a factory.
Thank you. Now I've got Brett with the hand up. Before I give you your time for the question, I want to read what you wrote, which is about, you said you would be reluctant to spray S45R, which now we call S15R, without cutters. And then you ask about any final difference in properties between the low viscosity crumb rubber and the standard S15R. Is there anything, Brett, that you want to add?
I was more commenting on the volatile emissions because we've done some similar exposure group testing with our spray seal crews in Transport for New South Wales, because in the past they've just lumped us in with asphalt and went, oh, it's the same stuff, it's got bitumen in it. And we went, no, it's completely different. So we tested for silica dust, hydrocarbons, as well as noise. And based on the preliminary results, we don't have the official stuff yet. I think we're using about 3% cutter on the day with S45R. And we were seeing well within tolerances of the suitable limits. Obviously, this is a guide. It's not an official response yet, but the preliminary reports look promising based on people's health and their exposure. And that was the spray driver, people doing the paper right behind it, which may be exposed, and others on site to varying levels. So
Thank you. And would this report be available for everyone? Would it be on, I don't know, a website or somewhere so that we can access it?
unfortunately not. The other thing is we're doing another test shortly as we come into our season where we do use a higher percentage of cutter to give us confidence in the results before we do anything. So
Okay. Now, there was your question, Brett, about the S15R without cutters, and you asked about if there is any final difference in properties between the low viscosity chrome rubber bitumen and the standard S15R.
yes,
Yeah,
45R.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I was just curious. Sorry, Trevor.
And I can, I don't want to preempt the next webinar. This will all be discussed in a lot of detail.
Yes.
So the answer is, quick answer is you can spray S45R, or what you call it, without cutter, and without going to the detail. It will be covered in the next webinar, how they do it, and it is being delivered in some parts of Australia without cutter, and low viscosity S45R still conforms and meets all the properties of S45R. It's just the viscosity at the spray temperature is much lower.
Yeah, right here. Thank you.
Yeah. And I just want to take this opportunity to remind everyone that we don't want to call it S45R. It's been renamed S15R. So please start using this new name. Otherwise, it's going to
Sorry,
be
I'm going to
confusing.
follow
That's what I'm gonna say.
transport specs.
That's right. That's what I was going to say. And yeah, it's been renamed. So it's the same stuff, just with a new name.
Yes. And I've got Russell. Would you like to add anything, Russell?
Yeah, hi Anna. Recently we did some spray sealing with the S15R with a double seal 14.7 with 2% or 2 parts cutter. And in terms of fuming, the only real exposure was the guys putting the paper down at the start of the run and picking it up. The rest of the time, spray, as you're saying, the fumes get wafted away. So no real issue with that. However, the only question we have is how much cutter is enough, and the less the better, I suppose. Probably all we got to say on that regard.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think you're right, Russell. I think the key is to where you can reduce the cutter to the minimum amount that's practical when it is required.
Yeah. Next, this is so it's asking best practice for use of cutter in 2-coat primer seal on new bays. Is it acceptable to use cutter in both coats?
Yes.
That's a very short answer.
Okay, so when you're doing a 2-coat seal, and this goes for initial seals as well, yeah, you can put less cutter in. 2 coats, I think, allow you to use less cutter because the whole idea is the second small aggregate is helping you retain the larger aggregate, but you can put less cutter in the bottom coat, I found. So you can still put cutter in the bottom, but it'll be less than the top. So I've seen some where they've done very low percentages in the cutter in the bottom and maybe put an extra couple of parts in the top.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I was going to say for initial seals, 20 years ago, people were talking about putting 10, 15 parts of cutter in initial seals. That it's halved. People are, we're seeing ones now where there are 4 or 6 parts of cutter in there for initial seals because this concept of we've got to get the initial seal to penetrate into the base. They don't. You just want them to adhere to the base. Mm-hmm. So this thing about having a lot of cutter in initial seals is really we've moved on since then.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
And I've probably had a number of experiences where if your conditions on site are appropriate, if it's a 2-coat initial seal or primer seal, I've put if using C170, no cutter in the bottom and a couple of parts in the top will work fine as well. I've found that sometimes that's better than having any in the bottom, but you need to be able to match the conditions. I've done it in reverse as well, where I've needed to put some in the bottom, but thought I'd get away without any on the top.
Okay. And the question, what's the recommendation? What is the recommendation for flushing the spray equipment in between spray runs?
So I can comment that my teams are using high flash cutters in their flush boxes, and that's what they're using. They're using the same product that they would be using if they needed to add cutter into their loads, basically. And I don't know if that's exactly a recommendation, but that's what we're doing, and it works okay.
And there are products on the market which are non-petroleum based, which you can use as well, which have got very high flash points.
Now, this is another question that is, I guess, go back to what you were saying, Rob, before, because this is again on priming. It seems cutter still should be used, otherwise it will not penetrate enough to the base course. And the second question is, in New Zealand, with this new approach, are they using emulsion primes?
Okay, so New Zealand don't prime, so they basically do initial seals. I mean, I think they have been looking at it, or they've been looking at maybe stabilising the bases with bitumen to get some maybe better adhesion between the initial seal and the base. But that's from what I hear. If there's anyone from New Zealand who wants to say I'm wrong, that's fine. In terms of priming, at the moment, emulsion primes have been around for quite a while, and they've been a bit hit and miss. But the technology's moved on, I think, now. So, it looks like we might be able to use emulsion primes and get good performance out of them. I've seen some emulsion primes quite a while ago, but where it just didn't penetrate. So I think. We need, if we're going to do a cutback here, you need a lot of cutter in a prime, but to get to that penetration. But it does look, like now the technology is available with emulsion primes that we can get a similar level of performance as a cutback. So hopefully as time goes on, we might get to a stage where we can maybe go to emulsion primes with, and they've still got some oil in them, but it's obviously not petroleum based. It's a bio type oil in there.
Now I just realized
just on that,
yes.
It also depends on the texture of the base. If you're using a very tight base, typically a cement stabilized base, it's very difficult to penetrate. Then cutters certainly would be the preferable priming agent. But if it's a granular base and it's open, then the emulsion prime certainly will do the job.
And the moisture in the base, and so there's a whole heap of factors. You really got to look at it on a case by case.
Probably in my experience as well, and I've used a lot of emulsion primes over a number of years now. I think if you're comparing a emulsion prime with, say, an AMCO or OO, I do think that there are some instances with some pavements you won't quite see the penetration that you'd be used to seeing with the cutback prime. But in my experiences, where those emulsion primes have worked well, you still get a really good adherence of the binder to the prime and the pavement. So where I've seen them work successfully on a number of times, if you tried to lift up that seal, you're taking the pavement with you. And ultimately, the aim of priming the surface in the first place is really to make sure that you're getting good adherence to the seal that's following. So I think Robert's right. There's maybe still a little bit of work in some places to do with emulsion primes, but I do think that the ones that are available out there in a lot of places do work well.
thank you all. I think we are a bit over time. So I'm just going to close here. So I've seen that there are other questions. Maybe I will circulate the questions to our speakers and come back to the people who asked. So at this point, I want to thank you all for joining us, and thank you to the speakers for not only staying with us today presenting, but also for the time to prepare the presentation and give us input and supporting this knowledge sharing. So again, thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.